Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! My name is Greg, and I'm the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan.
And my name's Joshua. I'm the Yugi newbie.
And on this episode, we're going to be discussing episode 7 of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, the Four Kids dub, Attack from the Deep. To give a brief overview of the episode, Yugi and his friends are just wandering around Duelist Island, and then suddenly they come across a fisherman guy, and he's also a duelist, so Yugi and him duel, and they're battling over starships. It's the most basic episode we've had so far, it feels like.
Yeah.
Josh, what's the first exciting thing that happens in the episode?
All right. So when we start off, Joey's hot off the heels of winning his first duel against Mai, which is very exciting. And he's kind of bragging a little bit about it. He's saying like, "Oh, I can't believe that actually happened. I won my first duel." And Taya and Tristan and Yugi are all talking about it. And he seems very proud of Joey coming off of this, whereas Taya's kind of just like, "Joey, like, come on, you're like, what are you doing here?" But Yugi seems very proud that he won a duel, especially against someone who is theoretically a very good duelist.
But then we're interrupted by the basic human necessity of hunger. And we get just one of my favorite lines, just because I assume it's a localization. I can't imagine they said this in the Japanese version, where Yugi's saying, "Yeah, you're right, Joey. I'm pretty hungry too, but I haven't seen any burger stands or restaurants since we arrived on this island." Something about that line just is so perfect to me.
Like no one says like burger stands. You usually say like fast food or something. Or I could say like a pizza place.
I guess it's just the same school of thought in the Pokemon Jelly Donuts thing, where it's like, well, what do kids like? Jelly donuts. Yeah, so they're eating jelly donuts.
Yeah.
What's something kids like? Burger stands, because everybody
Burger
calls them
stands.
burger stands. It's so funny.
You can't say McDonald's.
Burger King did the tie-in for Yu-Gi-Oh!
Ooh, nice. But yeah, Yugi says that, and then Tristan has his trusty survival kit.
I don't think he has a kid. I think he's just the book.
Oh yeah, it's just a book. But he's like, "Hey guys, I totally got you covered." And they're like, "Oh great, he's gonna pull some food out of nowhere." But then he's just got his book, which is another definitely like interesting aspect of his character, having him as this quirky side character who's kind of goofy, which is interesting because Joey also kind of somewhat plays that role.
In a way, they're trying to make all the characters funny to a certain extent. I mean, everybody has their humorous moments. And most of Taya's jokes, the punchline is she's a girl.
Yeah. Yugi definitely is probably like the least, but that makes sense because he's like the protagonist. You know, he's the driven one. He's the one who we're kind of supposed to be following as like the hero in this journey.
So then Joey uses his nose again for a second time to solve their problems in over 2 episodes. And that's to follow the scent of some fish being cooked nearby. And then we're introduced to Mako, the best character of this franchise, of course.
Yeah, and I actually did want. I really liked the writing in that one part. There was like a line. Joey smells something, and he's like, "Oh, I smell some food. I'm gonna go off." And then Tristan kind of doubts it, and he's like, "Oh, I don't think that he's gonna find anything. I don't know what he's talking about." But then Taya mentions, I'm like, "Oh, well, if you think about it, his brain didn't really win the past duel. His nose did." And I was like, "Oh, yeah."
You have it backwards, actually. It's Tristan that says that, but
oh, it's Tristan.
Yeah, same difference. I was actually surprised. For some reason, that stood out to me of like, wow, they actually like are trying to complement the continuity between episodes and the Four Kids dub. Good on them.
Yeah. I thought it was a good line because it was like just a good line. But then we meet Mako Tsunami because they're about to eat the fish, but then he comes up from the ocean and he gets angry that they stole his fish that he caught. But I'm curious what you make of this, Greg, because it seemed kind of strange to me. But when he first pops up, he's standing there and he's getting angry, and then a tidal wave knocks him back down for seemingly no reason. Like there was no reason for him to get knocked back in the water.
It's funny. It's silly. Like I said, it's like, you know, it's trying to interject comedy into most of these characters, which, you know, I mostly appreciate because this is such a, you know, a card game anime is such a silly premise that I appreciate that you're throwing in humor to say like, don't worry, this isn't supposed to be that serious.
Yeah.
But so what's your problem with it though? Just that it seemed pointless, or?
I didn't have a problem with it. I was just kind of like, it was weird because I was like, oh, okay, like he got knocked over. That's interesting. Maybe something will come of that. And then he got back up and basically said the exact same thing. So I'm like, why did that happen then?
I don't know. Maybe he said the F word in the English dub or something, or in the Japanese dub or something. And they had to censor it, so they threw a wave at him.
But that does make sense to me because the first half of the episode leading up to the duel, usually the duels are handled in this show a lot more seriously. So you have to like really lock in on the action, and there's not a lot of comic relief, I guess. So they kind of throw in a lot of this comic relief in the dialogue or the events like that at the start of the episode.
So to sort of go off a side tangent, or at least in a different direction, this is an episode that I typically skip, honestly, when I'm rewatching the show.
Interesting.
I'm trying to find this balance between not spoiling things for you and then also showing, you know, being able to articulate my opinion about certain things. And so to just give a minor spoiler in terms of just what doesn't play out, this is the last we're going to see of Mako in this whole arc.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he's not going to be a recurring character during the Duelist Kingdom arc. In a way that makes me think that this is somewhat a pointless episode. It's like you can just assume the next episode, okay, Yugi won, another Duel, got more starships. So it's an episode I skipped, so it was actually kind of refreshing to come back to, and I watched it twice today to prepare for the review. What I noticed this time that stuck out to me on a plot level, the episode is kind of pointless, but there's two things I found that this added. It gives us a respectable opponent for once, which is going to be a really rare thing. I don't even think in this season there's going to be another opponent that's going to be respectable in the same way that Mako is. Like when Kaiba comes back, like he's going to have like reasonable reasons for fighting and stuff like that, but like he's not exactly a respectable opponent to a certain extent.
Yeah.
What's funny is either the show or the character Mako thinks that he is like framing catching Yugi and his friend's attention as like, oh, I've caught you in my trap. But like other than throwing the harpoon, he doesn't do anything that nefarious to get their attention. Like challenging Yugi to a duel is not an outrageous thing in this circumstance, or really in any circumstance.
Yeah.
The only part that really pushes him over the insanity meters, when he's throwing harpoons at a kid.
Just a bit. No, I totally agree with that. I think it was interesting to have a duel that was very respectable because, like everything so far, they've been very kind of like trash talking each other and really like, no. Like,
and Weevil's been cheating and Mai's been doing some stupid card tricks and stuff like that. So, it's like, here's a guy who's just he's
just a good duelist.
Yeah, he's just down to earth. He just wants to fight fair. Obviously, you can't have that too often in a show like this because the point is to like show that good triumphs over evil and like trickery and stuff like that. But it's just nice to see this kind of character for once in the show. So it adds that. I still don't think plot wise you could skip this episode, but just in terms of like adding another theme or a layer to the show's ideologies and stuff like that and moralities and themes, it at least adds a little bit to that.
I don't know how the episodes are going to be later down the line. At the start of the show so far, like every episode has had something that's very important in some way. I'd say honestly, like last episode with Joey winning, like it's important because it's his first duel against Mai and stuff and everything. So we get a lot of development with him and the overarching plot with him and his sister. But this definitely, it's like a very good episode still. I thought it was like very well paced, well put together, very self-contained. But I now that you mention it, when compared to the other episodes, like you have to watch almost every single episode before this. This is the first one where you can kind of just be like, yeah, you can assume that Yugi's just doing his thing, winning some more star chips and doing a good job.
In the Weevil duel, it's like we spent a whole episode or 2 episodes really building up Weevil as a rival. So that's like the payoff to that. And then the Mai thing, again, sorry, not to spoil too much, but Mai is going to come back in the rest of this season.
Yeah, no, it's pretty clear that she's recurring.
That's important to set all that stuff up. This, it's like, it's just sort of a standalone episode, but the only plot thing that happens is that Yugi gets 2 more star chips. So this is a pretty basic episode. I ended up liking it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Coming back to it, I thought this was going to be one I wasn't going to recommend, and I think I am by the end of this review, simply just because it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
This duel is pretty fun. Mako's such a over-the-top fun character. Give a technical shout out. Like, I think we talked about in the last 3 episodes at least, like the Weevil duel and the Mai duel, we thought the animation was taking a bit of a dip. Like it was looking a lot less solid and a lot more just like loose, and how everything was being animated. Like it looked like they were losing control of the animation. This one I actually think is really well animated, which is funny because it's the most pointless episode so far.
Mm-hmm.
The only knock on the animation is I think most of the shots of the Pharaoh in this episode are like reused animation cells from like the previous episodes and stuff like that. So that was the only time it was getting a little cheap. I'm not sure what to talk about with the duel, honestly. Do you have anything that stood out to you that you found interesting?
I know you mentioned this a while ago, but I did think it was kind of funny that he caught the fish and then he was claiming that like he was angry at them for eating it. It was unclear if Mako was catching these fish because he wanted to bait people like Yugi and Joey and his friends, or if he was actually just trying to eat fish.
It seems like he was baiting people because he said, I did this to some people like just before you guys showed up, is that I baited them in with my fish and then challenged them to a duel. But because he also points out that like they were worthy opponents, I'm wondering if like when Yugi and Joey first showed up and he didn't recognize them at all, he was like, oh no, more like worthless opponents that aren't going to be a challenge. And then when he realized it's Yugi, he's like, oh, okay, this will be a fun challenge. So I'm going to have some fun with this. And that's when he like turns nice on them.
I think so. And it makes sense too, because kind of in a similar thing to what Weevil did earlier in this season, what he's doing here is because all of his cards are so ocean/water based, he needs to bring people onto his turf on the ocean. Yeah, so exactly. He needs to lure people here. He can't go exploring the island. So it definitely makes sense.
So to get into the duel a little bit, so like the gimmick of this one, I guess, is where like Mako's side of the field is the ocean and then Yugi's side is land. And Mako, obviously being the fisherman character, he uses all fish monsters and stuff like that. All of his monsters are able to hide under the water and Yugi can't see their stats and stuff like that, like their attack and defense points, which I think is funny. Again, there's no rules here, kind of like the Weevil duel, they're trying to string this together with some kind of logic in terms of like what an actual physical fight like this would be like. But in terms of a game, this doesn't make any sense.
Interesting. I was wondering if there was like a similar mechanic, or it seems really hard to implement, where you could hide your cards. Like I'm assuming normally you show your cards.
In regular Yu-Gi-Oh, you can put like field spells out that'll boost certain types and stuff like that, but there's like no physical field advantage that you can get that's just like inherent to whatever game you're playing or something like that in real Yu-Gi-Oh.
Okay. But I like the way it plays out here.
Yeah, it's mostly fine. It's a short duel. Obviously, it's just one episode, so it doesn't go on too long. Again, it's just another fun Yu-Gi-Oh duel, the animation, the music and stuff. I really like the music used in this whole episode.
One thing I can mention is I feel like we're definitely starting to see a consistency in Yugi's deck because he's starting to reuse some of the same monsters, most notably the Feral Imp, I believe, which he once again combines with the unicorn horn?
Horn of the Unicorn.
The Horn of the Unicorn, sure. Which he combines with that. So it's kind of interesting and cool to see that he's getting like the same cards. And so we're really starting to get a consistency on his side, whereas obviously all the monsters that opponents have basically is always new monsters that we're not familiar with.
Were you not expecting that? Were you just expecting Yugi's deck to throw out whatever they wanted to do that week? I'm kind of curious.
I guess from my perspective, I don't know how big a Yu-Gi-Oh deck is, and it kind of feels like it's surprising that someone would get the same cards this much, but it's possible that like decks are a lot smaller than I think they are. Because I would assume like if in my head the deck is a lot bigger than it probably is. So it's like, oh, he wouldn't get like the same cards. It'd take a while for me as a viewer watching Yugi play to like see him getting the same cards.
At some point in the show, they'll acknowledge that it's 40 card minimum deck, and I think that's basically what you're supposed to expect is 40 cards for people's decks. That's what it's like in real Yu-Gi-Oh! Is you play 40 cards. You can play to 40 to 60.
Okay.
But actually, when the show was coming out, there was no limit on your deck. You could do 40 minimum and unlimited. But then they made the limit 60 at some point.
Yeah. And then with the duel as well, it's definitely like it starts off very back and forth, as I would imagine kind of a normal Yu-Gi-Oh game would kind of play out. I've noticed kind of a certain pattern to the duels. Usually the opponent has some sort of trick that they have, and then that kind of throws Yugi off, at least like kind of throws him off at the start a little bit. So they're kind of winning the first half of the duel, the opponent does, and then Yugi does like a really smart play or something that really shifts the tide. And sometimes that happens multiple times, like with Weevil, each episode kind of had its own shift like that. But it's definitely like a pretty predictable, but I want to compliment that they usually do something like pretty interesting as like a final move that he uses to really end the duel, which I feel like doesn't probably happen in a normal Yu-Gi-Oh game, because I feel like normally it's kind of just like, oh, like I just had better cards and then I killed your monsters. But maybe I'm kind of underestimating how dynamic a Yu-Gi-Oh game would be.
Hey, I've seen some amazing comebacks. Sometimes I've been playing them, sometimes I've just seen them being played. But I like that you're enjoying that aspect. And I sort of enjoy it. It sort of comes back to this whole issue of just like, not that they're not following the actual rules, it's just they're not really following any rules. So it's like, okay, I guess Yugi's allowed to destroy the moon. There's nothing really solid about the meta of any of this. It's near impossible for me to be invested in the game in any kind of actual strategy way. It's just like, yep, that's a cool action thing that just happened. And I guess like there was some logic behind it. There's some, there's some creative thinking behind it. It's not like the writers are just writing nonsense. It's like, I understand it. The whole climax at the end of the duel, Yugi's played a moon card to increase his wolf's attack, but then unintentionally the sea rises around him. Or actually, maybe not unintentionally. Maybe he meant to do this the whole time. That's kind of interesting, actually. But the sea rises around him, and then Mako's monsters are just like right on his field. And then he destroys the moon with his stone soldier, and then the ocean dries up again and goes back to regular sea level. And then all of his monsters are washed up on Yugi's side of the field and like completely powerless and stuff like that. There's definitely creative thinking behind that. I'm just saying, like, in terms of actually enjoying it as an actual strategy game, there's nothing concrete about any of this. It's all just like nonsense.
Okay, because yeah, I definitely have less of that perspective because I've never played like an actual Yu-Gi-Oh game or honestly seen like a real one being played. So without that perspective, it follows like what seems to be a narrative thread. I can kind of tell that like what's happening in the show isn't something that would necessarily happen in like a normal game.
The actual game is nothing like this. The only similarities is that the attack and defense numbers basically in the life points. That's really all. And I guess the monsters having 5 zones on the field and stuff like that. But anyways.
But I totally get that you'd feel that way. But I think how I interpret the show, and I think how you do kind of as well, is that this show isn't about like watching people playing competitive games. If you wanted that, we could watch actual actual competitive games. This is for like the story, the characters, the silly action, the silly duels, and overall tone. When I'm watching this, I'm just like, not necessarily turning my brain off, but it's just like, oh, this is just silly. It's fun. It's well conveyed. It's well paced. It's just a good kids show that can be enjoyed.
But there's times where I'm watching Pokemon or Naruto where characters make combat strategy decisions that I go, oh, that's actually really clever. Like, that's a really clever solution to your problem. Here, I don't think I ever do that in Yu-Gi-Oh! Maybe I just have too much of that influence of the actual game in my head, and I just can't open my mind up to the idea of this being an actual believable game. But to me, it just never plays as believable, so that's my problem. At least in Pokemon and Naruto, it's actual things fighting each other. It's not exactly a game. This is in the most literal sense in comparison to Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, and Naruto. This is a game, and I don't think there's any real rules to this game.
There was something that I noticed that I think you noticed too. Occasionally there were some still frames that showed action rather than actually animating what was happening. For example, like I think when his Kraken was grabbing Yugi's whatever he had put out on the field, there was just a still frame and they kind of just panned across it in different ways. And they actually did that twice, once before.
They've been doing this the whole show. It's just sort of stood out to me this time.
For me, because I noticed that too, more so this time. I think it's because it held on it a bit longer. In the past, maybe it was just like it's a common thing in animation to do that, but this time it felt like a bit longer, which maybe they were really just trying to save time with animation. Like it wasn't.
Yeah. That's another one more side tangent. It's just that it's been a little bit since we've done our last recording, and this is actually the fastest we've ever done from whatever you want to call it, pre-production to actually recording the sessions that we woke up this morning, watched the episode, and now we're recording. That's the fastest we've ever gone about it, I think. At least so. In terms of both of us, at least. I think you probably watched it the morning of, right?
Yeah.
Not to call you out, Josh, I'm just saying.
I think it's better just because then it's fresh in my mind.
No, for sure.
I have a bit less prep.
Yeah. But sorry, what I was actually trying to say is that I've been watching, in the weeks we haven't been watching original Yu-Gi-Oh! I've been going back and watching GX. Still loving it, still enjoying it. That show is so cheap looking. The animation in that show is just the worst. Like, it's so washed out, and like there's barely any movement. Like things only move when they have to. It's one of the cheapest looking shonen animes. I don't know if it qualifies as a shonen anime, but you know what I mean. That kind of like mass produced, like 50 plus episodes per season anime style of just like that show is so cheap looking. And I go back and watch this show that's like made 5 years before, and it looks so much better, and it's just like shocking to me.
Yeah, no, I think overall, like there's definitely places where they're saving time, but overall they put a lot of effort into this.
So because of that perspective, I was just like paying attention to the animation a lot more this time. Maybe that's part of why this one stood out as looking like really good to me in comparison, just because I had like GX in my mind. In my notes, I wrote that this could be interpreted as like abstract. I know I'm pushing it. I think, well, what's funny is that what they're using it here, I feel like a lot of times they use those painted stills is when it's like a commercial break or even an episode cliffhanger. Like that's the last thing you're going to see that's note we're left on. Here they're doing it like within the fight scene. I think I know the answer of why they're doing this. They're just doing it because it's cheaper than animating a full fight sequence, and at least makes the shot look a little bit special. But I don't know. Like, is there any credence to me saying that it's tipping its toe in like abstract art, or is it just in terms of the animation shift, the fact that it goes from regular animation to these art, good looking paintings and stuff like that? Or am I just like stretching too far?
I'm not sure it's that abstract, but I definitely appreciate that it's kind of a different way of conveying the same story, or kind of the same way, because it is interesting that like normally when you think of moving pictures, you kind of need that's how you tell like something visually. But here, because of the greater context of the show, a single image is telling us a lot of what's happening, and so you don't really need to fully animate it. Like you can, and it'll look really good, but you don't need to convey the same thing. And also switching up from like moving pictures and everything to a single image can also kind of help the pacing, so everything doesn't feel too the same, I guess.
Okay, that's interesting. I think we should just talk about Mako's backstory, and then we can probably wrap up the episode, to be honest. Doing this show has actually made me like this show, love this show, honestly, more than I ever have in my life, which is really fun for me, because like I imagine doing this show would only make the show look worse in a way, because like, oh, we're here to point out like all the things that don't make sense or all the things that don't work narratively. No, I think this show is holding up under scrutiny. I think this show is looking better because I'm looking at it so critically. Another thing that stood out is that I felt like every episode so far has had like a different theme. So the second episode, in my opinion, failed, but it was trying to be about brains over bronze. bronze. That was a good theme. Episode 3 was about like loyalty to friendship and stuff like that, the way that all of Yuki's friends try to sneak on board the boat to support him and stuff like that. And then the first episode has the whole Heart of the Cards foundation of the show.
Yeah.
If this episode has a theme, I think it's one of faith and like bordering on religion context, just in the way Mako talks about the sea. Another thing that supports this to me is the way that Mako reacts to Yugi having a patch of land left after his wave attack or whatever, his tsunami attack, I guess, maybe. And he's like, wow, usually that covers up the whole field, but you actually have a patch of land left. You should consider yourself lucky. So like that to me, there's like an angle of faith where Yugi is being given a chance by chance, an assistance by luck or something like that, or a higher power. I'm reaching, but it just like that's how they kind of fit together to me. Mako's relationship to the sea is he loves the sea, even though the sea took his father away, but he still has faith that his father is alive. I have no religious background personally, but that's a theme I've seen explored time and time again in like other media about how even if you feel like the universe, God, whatever, took something away from you, you still have to have faith in them, and then eventually you'll maybe find like redemption or salvation, something like that. So that's definitely how I see Mako's relationship to the sea, where even though the sea like took the most important person in his life away from him, he's still able to forgive it and love it and stuff like that. So I find that interesting. And then yeah, my whole Yugi being left a patch of land after the oceans devoured the rest of his side of the field, to me that kind of felt like it was saying he was being blessed by some kind of force, because usually that, as Mako says, usually that attack leaves my opponent's side of the field completely flooded. So Josh, what do you think of my insanity?
I definitely get where you're coming from, and I see your argument. I definitely never thought of it as like a faith thing, but I totally see what you're saying. I guess my interpretation was more just a kind of a theme we've seen before with honor, kind of like Mai wasn't fighting with honor, she was fighting for like material goods or whatever. But in this episode, Mako and Yugi are both fighting for a loved one, and they very like clearly point that out. And what you've mentioned in the past, in the future episodes that I obviously haven't seen yet, but apparently it's somewhat rare to come across a respectable fellow duelist. So the fact that Mako is a respectable duelist, he's fighting with honor for very similar reasons to Yugi, because Yugi needs to win to save his grandpa, and Mako needs to win to have a ship that he can go search for his father. So they're both fighting for similar reasons. I don't know, you leave the episode with camaraderie sense, I guess, as opposed to other episodes, like at the end of the Weevil arc where Yugi is standing over Weevil.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and then Weevil's just cowering because he's this like kind of little boy basically, and then the Pharaoh's standing over him. I can see both themes applying to the episode, and I think both are equally valid. Overall, I was very happy with the episode. I enjoyed it. I'm surprised with how succinctly they're able to fit a duel into an episode, because I find myself occasionally looking at like the timestamp. I'm like, wow, like we're starting the duel 10 minutes in. We only have 10 minutes to finish this whole thing up. How is that going to go down? And I guess when like I was thinking about how like drawn out the Weevil duel was, that almost kind of felt like the standard for how long a duel should last.
Oh, just give it time, Josh. We'll get to 5-part episodes soon enough.
No, exactly. Which is that's kind of what I'm more expecting from this show. So to have such a self-contained thing where we introduce a character, the character is well developed, we get a duel that makes sense and is well paced. It doesn't feel too fast, but it also doesn't feel too short. It felt impressive to me.
I think we're going to get to seasons eventually where there are no one-episode duels anymore, and it's going to drive me crazy. Let me just say. Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed with this episode, to be honest, because I thought this was going to be my first not recommend, because it's not necessary plot-wise. But it does the other thing that's even more important to me. This is just a fun episode. I think Mako's an incredibly over-the-top and fun character. I like the discussion of faith in this episode. That was a kind of a surprising theme for me to find. Coming back to this one, I think the animation's finally taken a step up again, which is funny to me still because it's such a unnecessary episode to a certain extent. Yeah, don't miss this one. I think this belongs in the hierarchy. I think this is a very worthy episode of the series so far. I'm very happy.
I agree.
I can't wait to get to the next few episodes, because let's just say the plot's about to thicken. It's going to get real exciting.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think if you're watching the show just for like the key plot points, you want to get the narrative, then you can skip over this one. But if you're watching it because you just want to have fun with a good show, absolutely watch it, in my opinion. So recommend.
All right. Well, see you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a manga series originally created by manga artist and author Kazuki Takahashi, and originally published in Shonen Jump Magazine. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime was created by Gallop Company Limited, and the English dub primarily discussed in this podcast was produced by 4Kids Entertainment. This podcast is a non-profit media content and created for entertainment purposes only. All rights of content discussed and music used go to their respective owners. We hope you'll join us next time.